We know the face, we know the legend, William Bonney, Billy the Kid, the most notorious outlaw in the American West. History tells us he was a cold-blooded killer who gunned down 21 men, one for every year of his life. History tells us he was reckless, that he was a wild animal who didn't know when to run. But history is wrong. Billy didn't stay in Fort Sumner because he was stupid, and he didn't get caught because he was slow. He stayed because he was in love, and that love was the only thing more dangerous than the lawman on his trail. Her name was Paulita Maxwell, the princess of the Pecos, the daughter of the wealthiest baron in the territory. She was the Romeo and Juliet story that the dime novels didn't want you to read. Tonight, we aren't talking about the gunfights. We're talking about the reason he fought them. This is the story of the woman who broke Billy the Kid's heart and why his refusal to leave her became his death sentence. This is the truth about Fort Sumner. To understand why a man like Billy would risk the noose, you have to understand the world he was trying to marry into. Fort Sumner wasn't just a dusty outpost on the map. It was the stronghold of the Maxwell family, the unofficial royalty of the New Mexico territory. Lucian Maxwell, Paulita's father, had been the largest private landowner in the history of the United States. We aren't talking about a simple ranch. We are talking about an empire that spanned nearly 2 million acres. Even after his death, the Maxwell name was law. Paulita was the jewel of that empire. She was educated, wealthy, and striking. By all rights, she should have married a cattle baron or a politician, someone who could secure the family's future. Then there was Billy. He wasn't the jagged-toothed monster shown in the wanted posters. In Fort Sumner, he was a neighbor. He spoke fluent Spanish. He was a graceful dancer at the local bales. The local Hispanic community didn't call him a devil. They called him El Chivato, the little goat, young, wild, and free. He had worked for the Maxwells. He had broken bread at their table. But there is a vast difference between a hired hand and a husband. You have to remember what Billy was carrying with him. The Lincoln County War had just ended, and it had been a bloodbath. Billy had seen his friends murdered, his mentors gunned down, and his own name dragged through the mud by the Santa Fe Ring. He was 21 years old, but he had lived 100 years of violence. He was tired. He was looking for a home. But the walls were closing in. Governor Lew Wallace had placed a $500 bounty on his head, dead or alive. That doesn't sound like much today, but back then it was a fortune. It meant that every stranger who rode into town might be an assassin. It meant sleeping with one eye open, a Winchester always within reach. And the man hunting him wasn't a stranger, it was Sheriff Pat Garrett. This is the tragic twist of the knife. Garrett wasn't just a lawman, he had been a bartender in Fort Sumner. He knew Billy. They had sat at the same poker tables. They had likely bought each other drinks. Garrett knew exactly how Billy thought. He knew his habits. And most dangerously, he knew about Paulita. Every instinct Billy had, every survival skill he had honed, screamed at him to ride south to Mexico, to disappear into the desert where the law couldn't follow. He had the horses. He had the skills. He could have been in Chihuahua in a week, starting a new life under a new name. But he didn't ride south. He kept circling back to Fort Sumner. He kept stealing moments in the shadows of the Maxwell house. He was playing a game of Russian roulette, not with a gun, but with time. The town whispered. The sheep herders saw him slipping into the Maxwell orchard at night. They knew he was pressing his luck. And the man holding the watch was Paulita's own brother, Pete Maxwell. Pete was the head of the family now. He was protective, proud, and terrified that the family name would be stained by an outlaw. Pete knew Billy was dangerous, but worse than that, he knew Billy was in love with his sister. And in the Old West, class lines were often drawn in blood. The romance / the conflict. They say love is blind, but in the New Mexico territory of 1881, love was something far more dangerous. It was visible, it was loud, and for Billy it was the tether that kept pulling him back to the slaughterhouse. To understand the depth of this tragedy, you have to look at what happened just months before the end. In April of 1881, Billy had already been captured. He was sitting in the Lincoln County Jail, awaiting a date with the hangman's noose, and then he did the impossible. He slipped his cuffs, he gunned down 2 deputies. He rode out of Lincoln singing, "A free man once again." This is the moment where the history books usually focus on the violence, but they miss the psychology. At that moment, Billy Bonney had the world at his feet. The border to Mexico was open. He had friends in Chihuahua. He could have vanished into the Sierra Madre and lived to be an old man. Any rational outlaw would have ridden south until the horses gave out. But Billy didn't ride south. He rode east. He rode right back into the mouth of the lion. He rode back to Fort Sumner. Why? The locals knew. The whispers in the cantinas were loud enough to reach the ears of the law. Billy told his friends he had business in Sumner, but his business wasn't cattle, and it wasn't gambling. His business was Paulita. Their romance wasn't just a schoolboy crush, it was a scandal. Paulita was high society, Billy was a ruffian. But inside the dance halls, the bales, those distinctions melted away. Witnesses from the time described them dancing the quadrille, spinning for hours. Paulita was said to be the only woman who could match his energy, the only one who wasn't afraid of the gun on his hip. She gave him a gold ring, a ring he wore until the day he died. But this love affair was happening under the roof of a family that was terrified. Pete Maxwell, Paulita's brother, was watching. Pete was a man under immense pressure. He was trying to legitimize the family business, trying to distance the Maxwell name from the violence of the range wars. And here was Billy sliding through the orchards at midnight to tap on his sister's window. It was an open secret. Everyone in Fort Sumner knew. They saw Billy's horse tied up in the brush. They saw the shadows moving. And there is a darker, more urgent layer to this story that historians have debated for a century. Some sources, and certainly the local oral histories of New Mexico, suggest that Paulita wasn't just in love. They suggest she was pregnant. If that were true, it changes everything about Billy the Kid. He wasn't just a reckless kid refusing to leave his girlfriend. He was a desperate father-to-be who couldn't bear the thought of abandoning his child. It explains the irrationality. It explains why when his friends begged him to leave, he would just smile and say, "I can't, not yet." But the clock was ticking. Sheriff Pat Garrett was closing the net, and Garrett was smart. He realized he couldn't chase Billy down in the open plains. Billy was too good a rider, too familiar with the terrain. So Garrett stopped chasing. He started waiting. He knew about Paulita. Garrett understood that Billy's heart was his fatal flaw. He knew that no matter how close the law got, Billy would eventually return to the Maxwell house. The sheriff turned the romance into a weapon. He began quietly interviewing the locals, pressing the Maxwell family, tightening the screws. By July, the air in Fort Sumner was thick with paranoia. Billy was hearing rumors that Garrett was in the area. A smart man would have slept in the hills, miles away from town. But Billy was sleeping in houses just yards away from Paulita's bedroom. He was taking meals with her friends. He was walking around in his stocking feet, eating peaches, laughing at the danger. It was a terrifying arrogance born of love. He felt safe in Fort Sumner because it was her home. He believed the town would protect him because they loved him and because he loved one of their own. But Pete Maxwell had reached his breaking point. The pressure from the law was too much. The risk to his family's reputation was too great. The brother who should have been Billy's protector was slowly becoming his betrayer. The conflict was no longer between the law and the outlaw. It was a domestic war. It was Pete Maxwell versus Billy, fighting for the soul and future of Paulita. On those hot July nights, the tragedy was set. Billy was staying in a friend's adobe house on the edge of the property. He was restless. He told friends he was thinking of finally making a run for Mexico, maybe taking Paulita with him. But he hesitated. He waited one day too many. He didn't know that Pat Garrett wasn't miles away. He didn't know that the sheriff was already in town, slipping through the darkness, guided by the very people Billy trusted. He didn't know that the trap wasn't set in a canyon or a box canyon. The trap was set in the one place Billy thought he was safe. The trap was set in Paulita's own house. The stage was set for a confrontation that wasn't about justice. It was about a jealous brother, a relentless lawman, and a boy who stayed too long at the fair. The romance that had kept Billy alive was about to kill him. It was near midnight on July 14th, 1881. The air was heavy and hot, the kind of heat that hangs over the Pecos Valley and refuses to break. Pat Garrett was already inside the Maxwell house. He hadn't kicked down the door. He hadn't stormed in with a posse. He was sitting quietly in the dark in the bedroom of Pete Maxwell. He was asking Pete one final time, "Where is the kid?" Outside, Billy was walking across the courtyard. He was in his stocking feet. He wasn't carrying a rifle. In his hand, he held a butcher knife. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for a steak. He had asked for some fresh beef for a late supper. He was comfortable. He was at home. He walked past the room where Paulita slept. He stepped onto the porch of her brother's room. This is the moment where the tragedy tightens like a noose. Billy wasn't killed in a standoff. He walked into an ambush set by the family he tried to join. He pushed open the door to Pete Maxwell's room. The room was pitch black. Billy sensed something was wrong. He saw a shadow near the head of the bed. He didn't know it was Pat Garrett. He thought it might be Pete, or perhaps an intruder. Billy didn't shoot. A ruthless killer would have fired at the shadow immediately. But Billy hesitated. He stepped forward, whispering into the darkness in Spanish, "¿Quién es? ¿Quién es?" Who is it? Who is it? He was asking a question. He was confused. He was vulnerable. Inside the room, Pete Maxwell whispered to the shadow, "That's him." Pat Garrett didn't hesitate. He recognized the voice. He didn't ask for surrender. He didn't read him his rights. He drew his revolver and fired twice. The muzzle flash lit up the bedroom like a lightning strike. The first bullet struck Billy directly in the chest, just above the heart. Billy never fired his gun. He gasped, fell backward, and the only thing he left behind was a question. The kid was dead at 21. He hadn't died in a blaze of glory on the open range. He had died in the dark, barefoot, in the bedroom of his lover's brother. He died because he felt safe in a place that had already turned against him. The Romeo of the Pecos had played his final scene, and as the gunsmoke drifted out into the New Mexico night, the cries began. Not from his gang, but from the women of the house. Paulita's scream was said to have pierced the night, a sound of heartbreak that would haunt Fort Sumner for a generation. The sun rose over Fort Sumner the next morning, but the world had changed. They buried Billy in a rough wooden coffin just a few feet from where he fell. But while the town mourned the outlaw, the Maxwell family went to work bearing the truth. To the Maxwells, the death of Billy the Kid was a relief. But the romance, that was a scandal. A wealthy heiress in love with a wanted cop killer, that was a stain on the family name that had to be scrubbed clean. Paulita was shielded from the press. The family closed ranks. Within months, the rumors were silenced. The dime novels were already being written, and they didn't care about a heartbroken girl. They wanted the gunslinger. They wanted the villain. Paulita was written out of the story, reduced to a footnote, or erased entirely. Life moved on, as it always does. Paulita eventually married a wealthy man, Jose Jaramillo. She had children. She lived a long, respectable life. But the locals never forgot. For decades, whispers followed her. When reporters finally tracked her down in her old age, she denied the romance. She played her part. But those who knew her best said that she never truly recovered from that hot July night. Billy the Kid is buried in a cage in Fort Sumner, a tourist attraction for the world to see. But the real story isn't in the grave. It's in the silence. It's in the fact that the most dangerous man in America died because he couldn't bear to leave a woman behind. He wasn't the monster they sold us. He was a boy who loved a girl too much to save himself. And that is the part of the legend that deserves to be remembered. History is fragile. It is easy for the truth to get lost in the legend. If you enjoyed this look behind the curtain of the Wild West, If you believe these untold stories deserve to be remembered, then please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Help us keep the past alive. There are many more stories waiting to be dug up, and we'd be honored to have you ride with us. Until next time.